Welcome back to Neutrality Studies, tonight again with Dr. Pietro Shakarian, a good friend of the show, and for the first time, Eldar Mamedov, a non-resident fellow at the Quincy Institute and a member of the Pugwash Council on Science and World Affairs. Pietro, Eldar, welcome.
Pascal, thank you for having me on, and actually thank you really for having Eldar on, because he's one of the top experts who can speak to this issue of Iran and Azerbaijan and all this. So I'm very glad you were able to bring him on the show. So, gentlemen, thank you so much for being a company, and looking forward to a great conversation.
Thank you. My pleasure. Pleasure being here. Thank you so much.
And I'm very glad, because this was actually Pietro's idea. So wonderful idea, Pietro. And Eldar, then let's start with you. Can you give us a little bit of maybe your connection with Azerbaijan and Iran? And I understand you also were in Iran not too long ago. Can you give us a little bit of your background, and then your analysis of where the Azerbaijani part of Iran stands today, as we are speaking on this 30th of March, one month into the war?
Well, concerning the background, I've been doing the Iran dossier in the European Parliament for more than 15 years, which included organizing missions from the European Parliament to Tehran, several missions in the happier times when the EU and Iran still had a proper political diplomatic dialogue. In the European Parliament, interparliamentary diplomacy was one of the branches of this dialogue. So obviously now it's not happening, but we can come back to this. So I was a participant to dozens of European Parliament resolutions that have been drafted on Iran. So not all of them of the equal value, to put it mildly, but that's part of my story. And indeed, I've been in Iran on almost two dozens of occasions. I think all in all, a total 17 times I was in Iran, including twice last year. So the first time was in May, end of May actually, which made me one of the very few Western analysts who visited the Islamic Republic before Israel launched its war against Iran, known as 12 Days War in 2025. And on that occasion, I participated in the conference organized by Tehran Dialogue Forum, which is actually part of the main think tank, Institute for Political International Studies, which depends on Foreign Ministry of Iran. And then I was again in Iran last year in November, which again made me one of the very few Western researchers who visited Iran after the war. And of course, it gave me some pretty precious insights into how the political elites is thinking, how they saw the situation then, which of course helps to understand their strategy and the steps they're taking now. But I think equally, if not more valuable, was indeed this opportunity to travel beyond Iran, and specifically to the areas in the north, which very few tourists in Iran, or very few visitors to Iran, visit actually. If anything, if they visit any places beyond Tehran, usually those tend to be Isfahan or Shiraz or Persepolis, the historically well-known landmarks. Very few people go to Tabriz, to Ardabil, to the north, but those are very rich areas in terms of the ethnic and religious tapestry that's present there. So it was a pretty enlightening visit. It was not my first visit to the Iranian Azerbaijan, but the first one was more than 10 years ago, so it was very useful to get updated impressions.
And let's just continue there. I mean, what is the impression from over there? Because we've had all of these talks about, also Azerbaijan actually like getting readying its troops on its side of the border. But actually, as far as I understand, there's actually more Azeris. So ethnic Azerbaijanis living in Iran than in Azerbaijan. So what is the situation there around Tabriz and in these places? Is there any kind of separatism going on?
No, this is not a serious proposition. Iranian Azerbaijanis, they've been part and parcel of Iranian history for centuries. Let's not forget that some of the most prominent monarchical dynasties in the history of Iran, they were Turkic, or as they would say to the Azerbaijani origins, such as like the Safavids, for example, or the Gajars, the dynasty who ruled before the Pahlavis came to power. Does that make them Azerbaijani? Of course not. They are Iranians who happen to be ethnically Azeri, who have their own language, what they call Turkish. Of course, it's not the Turkish of Istanbul; it's the Turkish of Tabriz, or of that area. They very seldom they use Azeri or Azerbaijani as a marker of identity. So what they are, they are Iranian Turks with the emphasis on Iranian. Overwhelming majority feel strongly identified with the Iranian state. Let's also not forget that the slain supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei was of Azeri origin. The president Masoud Pezeshkian is of Azeri origin. The chief of staff of the armed forces, who was also killed by the Israelis during the 12 days war, Muhammad Ali Bagheri, was of Azeri origin as well. He was born in Tabriz. And interestingly, in case of Bagheri, he was also someone who visited Persepolis and made quite a big show out of it to show the nationalist sentiment, being an Iranian Turk. So, and that is very typical. Iranian Azeris, Azerbaijanis, Turks, whatever you want to call them, the overwhelming majority of them are staunch Iranian patriots.
Hey, very brief intermission because I was recently banned from YouTube, and although I'm back, this can happen anytime again. So please consider subscribing not only here, but to my mailing list on Substack. That's pascalotta.substack.com. The link's going to be in the description below, and now back to the video.
That doesn't mean that the pan-Turkist sentiment does not exist at all. It does exist. There are TV channels who beam out from outside Iran. There's one based in the United States called Gunas TV, which is like South Azerbaijani TV. And some people do watch that on satellite dishes or otherwise. But I cannot say that being in Tabriz or in Ardabil, you have this pervasive feeling of any affinity with the Republic of Azerbaijan, with its president Aliyev, or any inclination to secede from Iran. In fact, many Iranian Azerbaijanis, they joke, why would we want to join with Baku if we can rule Tehran? And that in many ways is true, because so many of them, I just mentioned few examples, but I could go on and on. For example, going to another level, the best football player in the history of a top goal scorer in the history of Iran is Ali Dai, and he's from Ardabil. So he's also of Azerbaijani origin. So examples like this, there's so many that it simply doesn't make any sense. And actually, no one in Iran even frames the question in terms of ethnicity. This is entirely imported concept, which was promoted during the times of the Soviet Union. The Iranian Azerbaijan was seen as part of Iran that was ripe for liberation from Persian yoke. So that was the narrative that was spread during the Soviet times in school books, in Soviet schools in Azerbaijan. And then when the independent Republic of Azerbaijan was established after the breakup of the Soviet Union, so the new elites, they accepted this narrative as one of the foundational myths of Azerbaijani state, particularly the nationalist movement that first came to power after the breakup of the Soviet Union, under the president Abulfaz Elchibey. They were, and their political successors in today's Republic of Azerbaijan still are, very strongly committed to this idea of the southern Azerbaijan. To some extent, the government, Ilham Aliyev's government, co-opted this narrative into its own discourse. But in case of Aliyev, it's more opportunistic than really passionate and ideological. But the point is that this whole narrative of Southern Azerbaijan, it's like it's like an internal echo chamber in Baku. It has literally no impact and no influence among the Iranian Azerbaijanis. And in fact, the first time when I visited those parts of Iran, that was more than 10 years ago, when I broached the subject of the South Azerbaijan, they were really surprised to hear that such a concept even exists. So to summarize, I would say this is not a serious proposition. And by the way, the recent war has shown once again, and I hope conclusively, that South Azerbaijan is just a pipe dream. Because if we were to believe the narrative that up to 30 million, or some would say 40 million of Iranian Azerbaijanis, by the way, if you listen to some of those Azerbaijani nationalists, you could easily believe that the majority of population of Iran are of ethnic Azerbaijani or ethnic Turkish origin. Yeah, but that's the nature of all ethnic nationalists, to exaggerate and to inflate numbers to boost their case. But if indeed, suppose that was the case, that those tens of millions of people were ready to revolt in the name of seceding from Iran, establishing independent entity or joining the Republic of Azerbaijan, the question is why there were no uprising at all? So in January, remember, there were widespread, sorry, protests against the Iranian government, and they were followed in short order by Israeli-US war on Iran. So one would think, could there be any better conditions for such an uprising if indeed there was any ground for it, any basis for it? So the fact that it didn't happen is, I think, a conclusive evidence, if there was ever a need for one, that this concept is simply not a serious proposition.
Yeah.
I also want to add just one more thing too to that, because like Eldar was mentioning about kind of how this idea of the South Azerbaijan was kind of promoted in the Soviet times. There was even a moment where, during the Second World War, the founding, the founder of the Pahlavi dynasty, that's Reza Shah, was overthrown by the British and the Soviet Union to secure Lend-Lease supplies through Iran. And at the end of the war in 1946, actually, there was an effort by the Soviet Union to promote like an Azerbaijan People's Republic in northern Iran. So there is even this history that Iranians know of external players trying to kind of foment, kind of break away entities in the north of Iran. And not only, there was also the Kurdish Mahabad Republic that was also being encouraged at the same time. Now, eventually, the Soviets kind of deal with the Shah, and that whole episode ended, and then that was the end of it. But there has never been a serious, just like Eldar says, there's never been a serious push for independence of Iranian Azerbaijan. To give you an idea, Pascal, the level of integration of Azerbaijanis with Iran is almost like, historically speaking, how Ukrainians were integrated with Russians. Like how we have somebody like Mikhail Gorbachev, was part Russian, part Russian, part Ukrainian. His wife is fully Ukrainian. Or like even you could say maybe another example might be Manchus in China, how they were historically integrated with the Chinese history and culture, like the Qing dynasty and all this. But that's how deeply integrated Iran is. It's central, really. I mean, that's how deeply integrated Iranian Azerbaijan is with the history of Iran. So and even somebody like Mousavi, the opposition leader from the 2009 Green Movement, he was himself of Azerbaijani descent or origin, or Iranian Turkish origin. So yes, that Eldar, I mean, gave you a perfect summary of it. But yeah, absolutely.
So how does this, Pietro, how does this, in your view, now also impacted the development of the war? Like the sheer fact that Iran is a multi-ethnic, functioning, well-working society, as opposed to, like, let's say Syria, in which you could see how these different ethnicities were being played out against each other, especially the Kurds, right? And then dropped like a hot potato once they were not needed anymore by the United States. Pietro, how do you see that develop? And maybe one more thing, is there also an Armenian minority living in Iran, actually?
Absolutely, yes, there is, and it's very integrated in Iran. And as a matter of fact, the Iranian government is very deferential to the Armenian Christian population. They're very tolerant of the Christian population. They even opened a metro station devoted to the kind of devote in deference to the Christian population of Iran, in deference to the Armenian Christian population of Iran. So they are, and even the Armenian historical sites, the monasteries, like the Saint Thaddeus Monastery in northern Iran. This is very well preserved by the Iranian government, and not only it's considered a holy site by the Iranian Azerbaijani population. So that's actually, and also kind of like to give you like a reverse of this, within Armenia itself, I can tell you, because I'm here in Yerevan, that there is a lot of sympathy toward Iran in Armenia over this war, to the point that if you go to the Blue Mosque on Mashtots Avenue in Yerevan, there's like a makeshift memorial dedicated to those who died in the war. I mean, basically supporting Iran in this against this war of aggression. And also, there's even, of course, also dedicated to those schoolgirls who died in Minap. So actually, the religion also is not like a good, way to divide everybody up here. I mean, that's often in Western commentaries. They do this kind of focusing on Christian Armenians versus the Muslims or whatever. But it's not in a case like this, as you can see, that the religion is not so much a decisive factor.
Can I jump
on it? Oh, go. I just want to say one. Okay, go ahead, Eldar.
Okay, no. It just perfect occasion for me to jump in, because in fact, during the trip that I mentioned last year to Iranian Azerbaijan, I actually visited those monasteries, San Tadeus, San Stephanos, and Shepherd's Chapel, and the impression I had was exactly the one that Pietro described. Those places are not just well preserved, they're also cherished. And you see both the Christian Armenian worshippers, but actually also Muslim visitors. And most of those visitors who just, visiting those places as tourists, I overheard them speaking in Azeri Turkish. So, which is something that could be difficult to imagine just across the border in the, supposedly secular, modern, enlightened Republic of Azerbaijan, where those churches and other, monuments of Armenian heritage were simply destroyed. So it was quite, I would say, fascinating to be in those places, literally right next to the river of Arax, which is the natural border between Iran and the Republic of Azerbaijan, in a sense, directly overlooking, the other side of the river, in Nakhchivan region, which has become infamous because of the wholesale destruction of Armenian Hajkars, the holy tombstones. And there was even a big story, The Guardian, back in, I think it was 2006. So here is this contrast. And I think it's very important to emphasize it because the narrative that we get in the Western media, especially in the run-up to the war, is one of a demonization of Iran, this horrible place that hates Christians, that hates Jews, that kills everybody who is not Muslim, who wants you essentially to be jihadist if you want to be alive. So there could be absolutely nothing farther away from truth. And the situation, the fate of the Armenian community in particular, is a striking example of that. Now, I don't want to be carried away and to say that there's just perfect harmony and there are no problems. Of course, there are problems, but the problems that the Christian Iranians face actually are those faced by the Iranians of other denominations as well. Of course, there are some discriminatory provisions. For example, a Christian cannot become the supreme leader in the Islamic Republic, and there are also some other provisions. But I think what's important is if you put things in perspective, you put things in the context. If you compare the situation of Christian population in Iran with that of other countries in the region, in particular neighboring countries, then the difference is quite striking, and I would say it's in favor of Iran.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, something else, Pascal, I just want to add to this, which is that, I mentioned about the Blue Mosque in Yerevan. This is a legacy of the history of Iranian rule over Eastern Armenia. And actually, this was restored as kind of a collaborative effort between the Armenian government and the Iranian government, and now it's like an Iranian cultural center. And also it services, kind of Iranian workers, who attend the mosque here in Yerevan. But one more thing I also want to mention, you said, what's the difference between Iran and a country like Syria or, I don't know, Iraq or Jordan or something like this? Well, the reality is Iran, Pascal, and this is why Trump really made a major miscalculation with this war. Iran is like a civilizational state. It's Persia. The borders of Iran have more or less been unchanged for centuries. So the borders we have of Iran today, with the exception of something like north of the Arax River with Trans-Caucasia, the Armenia, Georgia, Azerbaijan, all this, that with very few exceptions, the borders of today's Iran are still the borders that you would have basically seen around the period of like the Safavid Empire, let's say. So like even the famous border that defines Iran's the famous frontier between Iran and Iraq or Iran and Turkey, this is still a legacy of the old 1639 border between the Ottoman Empire and the Safavid Empire. So what we're dealing with here, Pascal, and this is something Eldar also can speak to, that this is a civilizational state. It's not just like something that's a creation of the Sykes-Picot Agreement or something like this. It's not a new country by any means. It's a old country where the borders have been more or less unchanged for centuries. Even going back, it's just striking when you look at like the old history of Iran, when you look even at Parthia and the period with the Roman Empire, and also the Roman leaders. I can speak to this. They tried unsuccessfully to conquer Iran. So there was even the history of Crassus was trying to do a campaign against Iran. He wanted to go through Armenia. The Armenian king Artavaz, or actually, no, excuse me. Let me just rephrase that. That the king Artavaz II of Armenia invited Crassus to go through Armenia. He thought that this is the best route for you. But Crassus instead decided, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go through Mesopotamia, right? Because I don't want to have to be, burdened with the business of protecting Armenia or whatever. But in the end, this turned out to be a fatal miscalculation, and he was decisively defeated. In the meantime, Iran and Armenia made kind of their own kind of separate peace, right, through a marriage alliance. And at the performance of a Greek play, actually in Armenia, the Artavaz II was there with the Parthian king, and they served Crassus's head on a plate, right? So it shows you the folly of trying to conquer Iran, in the history. Also, Mark Antony, he was being encouraged by Cleopatra to kind of, go against Iran. Julius Caesar, before he was assassinated on the Ides of March, was thinking about going against taking on Iran. So this is an old country. I mean, and to think that like Trump of all people could could succeed where Mark Antony had not succeeded, I think is incredibly insane. I mean, just to put it lightly.
Yeah, Eldar, can you speak to this? I mean, the age of Iran, what this also does to a people. And I'm from a place, the Swiss, they trace their roots back 800 years, but we now more or less know that 600 of these 800 are more or less made up mythology. Not that they weren't there, but that the national narrative, Switzerland, modern Switzerland, is basically a 200-year-old construct. It works, but it's relatively young the way that we know it today. Iran, though, I mean, what does this do to the way that these people also think about the land that they're living on and the responsibility that they have? And I just want to point out, Porras Marandi keeps saying Iran is the only state that really supports Gaza and the Palestinians, although they are Sunni, most of them, and Iran is Shia. But he says this doesn't matter because this is about the people and not about what kind of prayers they say. Can you speak to that?
Well, on the first point, Iran being civilizational state, actually there's very little I can add. I think Pietro made an excellent overview, and I fully agree with that. There's not much to add to that. Concerning the point made by Professor Marandi, I would say that to say that there is unanimity in Iran concerning the Gaza and the Palestine question more in general, I would say that would be some exaggeration. The baseline is that indeed the overwhelming majority of Iranians, just like people elsewhere in the world, they are very critical of Israeli perpetrated genocide in Gaza. So there is largely there is no dissent on that. Now, to what extent Iran has to get involved, and to what extent it should have made the Palestinian question, such a pillar of its own foreign policy, that's a matter of debate. And in fact, it's not a new debate. What is interesting, though, is that, again, the narratives that are being pushed to justify the war on Iran are heavily based on Israeli lens, on the way the Israelis see the things. And the Israelis just see a regime that for 47 years demanded the destruction of the Jewish state. And they use this to bolster their case for the removal of the regime. But that narrative has many holes in it. It's incomplete, to put it mildly, because there were, periods in the Iranian history, in the history of the Islamic Republic, when the authorities they showed more flexibility in this question. For example, it was already during the presidency of Mohammad Khatami when Iran adopted a line according to which they would agree to any deal between Israel and Palestinians, to which Palestinians themselves would agree. And yet that is being completely, overlooked in that narrative that portrays Iran as this terrorist state that is hell bent on destroying Israel. Now, no doubt that the enmity towards Israel is one of the pillars of the identity of the Islamic Republic, not just of its foreign policy. And there may be multiple reasons for that, and not just so that with Gaza. There are also historical reasons. Mossad, for example, was instrumental in establishing the Shah's secret police, Savak, which was known for its savagery and for torturing dissidents. And many of the people who became the Islamic Republic elites, clerics, and not only, they had experience of passing through the Shah's prisons and being tortured by by Savak, which was in turn trained by Mossad. So there's also this, personal psychological element there, which also explains to a degree the viscerality of the feelings. But the point I want to make is that even on this issue, even on the issue of Israel, Gaza, there were windows of opportunity when Iranian regime have shown somewhat more flexibility. The problem is that whenever Iran showed itself available and ready for detente with the West, and those attempts, in fact, they were constant since the times of Hashemi Rafsanjani, early 90s. And they culminated with the JCPOA, of course, in 2015. So every time Iran have shown some flexibility, that trend towards moderation and towards integration with the world was undermined. Israel played a key role in undermining those trends, because essentially Israel isn't so much really concerned that Iran can destroy it in a physical, in a literal sense. Of course, it's nonsense. Iran doesn't have capability to destroy Israel, given that Israel is a nuclear-armed state. But that bogeyman of Iranian threat is used to tie in the American unconditional American support, and the strategic goal is to ensure Israeli hegemony in the Middle East. It's not. Because Israelis really feel or fear Iran as an existential threat. It's simply to assert their own hegemony and make sure that no state in the region has any viable deterrence against Israel, and Israel basically can act as it pleases, bomb any country at will, such as they do with Syria or with Lebanon, and the same status they want to achieve with Iran.
And one thing I just wanted to just add on that is the fact that, it shows you how senseless, Pascal, this whole war is, in the sense that there were so many opportunities to avoid it, even as early as, even, excuse me, not early, even as late as this February, when they were negotiating a peace deal with the Omanis, right? The Omanis were mediating this between Iran and the United States. That the terms of that deal were so good for the American side. It was the best deal that they could ever get. It was even better than the Iran nuclear deal, under Obama. But you see what the outcome is with this. Instead, that those negotiations were used as a cover for preparing this attack. And what's also quite painful about this is it undermines America's diplomatic credibility. So, and which also makes it very dangerous, because how can you trust anything the United States says? And not only here, by the way, there's also, again, the example that I raise of the case of the Minsk Accords, where you had Merkel and Hollande basically saying in the first year of the war in Ukraine that, well, we were using this Minsk Accords, we were using them as like a ruse to basically kind of build up Ukraine for, a future war with the Russians. So again, how does this kind of, how do these kind of steps and this kind of so-called fake diplomacy, how is that perceived by the rest of the world? It's very dangerous, But the other thing, again, I just want to, add on to this is how this all could have been avoided. And also, as Eldar was saying, how, that, when you do how diplomacy and outreach and détente can actually encourage domestic reform. We want to encourage, let's say, the United States really wants to see a more democratic Iran, a more open Iran. The best way you do that is to engage with the society, engage with the state, because you're not going to be able to go in as Trump attempted to do, and well, first of all, and kind of remove the government, right, or something like this. I mean, even the idea, really, we're not talking about so much regime change, but really regime removal at the end of the day, or kind of the idea of just destroying the regime and just leaving, I guess, a failed state. That would be the idea. But nevertheless, if you have something like the Iran nuclear deal, it encourages the domestic reform. And also, this applies not only to Iran, it can apply to Russia, it can apply to so many other countries in the world. By pursuing détente, you encourage the endogenous process of democratization. Right. But when you attack, when you become aggressive, when you go and do something like this, an unprovoked war of aggression, what do you expect the result is going to be? Now we see that. Now you see who has come. So they killed off people who could negotiate with them, who could have a more moderate regime or a more moderate government in Iran. And you see now the government is more hardline than it's ever been because
Yeah,
of
but
this.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but the thing is that the Western this narrative, the West just wants democracies. It's a sick joke. It's a sick joke. It was never meant. They were never serious about it. We know that. If they were, they wouldn't be dealing with Saudi Arabia the way they do. That it was never meant. What they want is control, and they don't want cooperation. They want subordination. So that's what Lascia Casratze on this show sometimes says. The United States just wouldn't take yes as an answer.
Yeah.
You need to completely submit. And that's the one thing that Iran actually said it wouldn't do. Now, what does this now do to the region, Eldar? Like, the Azerbaijan has played this very interesting role that it actually offered its support and bases even to like attacks that were coming from Israel in the 12th Day War. I'm pretty sure at the moment they have this integration. We know that Turkey is there, and Turkey basically, I mean, if I had to define opportunism in international relations, I would probably give the word Turkey, because which is not a stupid thing for a state, right?
It's very smart. He's incredibly smart. Erdogan is very, very, he's a very, very, clever politician, and he plays his cards well.
An extremely clever politician,
absolutely.
not a principled and moral one, but
Yeah.
you don't want to be principled and moral. You're going to get through to the next day. So, Eldar, like, what's your assessment for the entire region, Turkey, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and with Iran?
Well, I think when it comes to Azerbaijan, then frankly, the President Aliyev is in trouble. I think he's in trouble. His overt and enthusiastic embrace of Israel, the transactional deal, energy and strategic intelligence on Iran's foothold that Azerbaijan provided in exchange for cutting-edge military technology that helped Azerbaijan win the war against Armenia in 2020 and then 2023, plus lobbying power on Azerbaijan's behalf in Washington. So that was the architecture of the deal between Azerbaijan and Israel, and it worked remarkably well for both sides. However, what happened when the current war started was that in March, the beginning of March, two drones from Iranian territory, they landed in Nakhchivan, which is the autonomous region within Azerbaijan. No one was killed. There were 4 people who were injured. But that just showed how vulnerable Aliyev and Azerbaijan are to any spillovers from the Iran war. So what did Aliyev do? He delivered very combative speech. He called the drone attack as an act of terror. He blamed Iran directly, even though Iranians deny that drones were launched by them, and claimed that it was a false flag operation to drag Azerbaijan into war. I'm so sorry. So, but what did he do after he delivered that, characteristically combative speech, waving his, threatening with his iron fist um, to Iran? So, what really happened after that? So, the only real measure that was adopted was to close land crossings between Iran and Azerbaijan, which, by the way, harmed more the Azerbaijani, but also Russian and Georgian truck drivers who were, engaging in this cross-border logistics and trade with Iran. So in 4 days, that measure was lifted and the border was opened again. Aliyev, meanwhile, spoke with President Pezeshkian, and the Azerbaijani readout of that conversation feels very warm, very positive. Later, just a few days ago, also the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Iran, Abbas Araghchi, thanked Azerbaijanis in Azerbaijani language for sending humanitarian aid to Iran, to which the Foreign Minister of Azerbaijan, Ceyhun Bayramov, replied in both Azerbaijani and Persian. So what we see in this sort of bilingual diplomacy is a very deliberate effort to de-escalate tensions. Why? Simply because Aliyev suddenly was shown how vulnerable his country is, how exposed actually Azerbaijan's energy infrastructure is. And Azerbaijan depends on energy exports like 90%. This is not a diversified economy. This is an economy that depends almost entirely on export of hydrocarbons. So what they have is this Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan pipeline, through which Israel, for example, receives up to more than 40% of its oil needs, and then the whole oil and gas infrastructure in the Caspian. So all of that infrastructure is extremely vulnerable to Iranian missiles. And what we see in the Persian Gulf is that Iran is a retaliation for the attack on it. Iran is not hesitating in lashing out at infrastructure in Persian Gulf countries. So you can debate to what extent is a smart strategy or counterproductive strategy, but clearly there is a strategy, and the strategy is to inflict as much pain on the broader region as a payback for an attack on Iran. And by the way, Iranians made it very clear to everybody that this is what they would do if they attacked. So they're delivering. So in that context, Azerbaijan is essentially no different from the Gulf countries. It's very vulnerable. So therefore, Aliyev understands that it's in his interests to downplay tensions, hence the escalatory moves, the sending of humanitarian aid, this diplomacy at the level of foreign ministers. But I also think the Turkish factor is important. And since you mentioned Turkey, I think that's a really good point. Turkey is not interested in war in Iran. It has its own concerns regarding the potential destabilization and disintegration of Iran. The Kurdish factor comes into play. So Turkey definitely is not looking forward to any semi-autonomous, let alone independent Kurdish entities in the region. So it's conceivable that to some extent Erdogan also played this moderating role with Aliyev. And besides, there's also another issue here, which pertains more to Turkish, Azerbaijani, Israeli dynamics. Turks always want to assert their role as the main ally of Baku. In other words, that if there's a choice between between Ankara and Tel Aviv, Baku has to choose in those cases its alliance with Ankara. That's the position of Turkey. And frankly, in the situation that is now evolving in the Middle East, we see that Israel increasingly frames Turkey as its next enemy. In fact, they speak of it openly.
Yeah.
And that actually goes back to the point I made earlier, that for the purposes of Israeli hegemony, there can't be any strong military and economic power in the vicinity. So they all have to be either failed states or submitted to Washington and Tel Aviv's will, like Egypt and Jordan are, for example. So in this case, in this context, Turkey, as a powerful country with powerful military, independent foreign policy, is increasingly seen and framed, deliberately framed by Israeli and pro-Israeli actors as a next threat to Israel. So, and of course, that introduces an element of tension in relations between Turkey and Azerbaijan.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Pietro, do you want to speak to that? Because I mean, this is super important. Should this actually give a little bit of concern to Erdogan? And you know, there was this video last week that circulated that was put out by Israel, not by the state, but by somebody in Israel, and it kind of became a meme of the leaders all of the political leaders that Israel already killed off, waiting in a waiting room, and then the last one when the camera pivots over is like Erdogan waiting with his ticket to go into the slaughter room. I mean, this kind of stuff is around. Pietro, what do you think is it going to do to the regional geopolitics?
I think also it kind of strengthens I mean, really, I mean, Turkey, I mean, again, it has to be kind of careful because all, the oil coming from Baku goes through Turkey to Israel. At the same time, the Turkish street is incredibly, incredibly anti-Israeli and incredibly, sympathetic with Palestine. So this is a big issue. It puts Turkey in a much more difficult position, but it also puts more pressure on Turkey that they see that they are being singled out, not only in the case of this video, which is like set to, Jim Morrison in The Doors, the end, this kind of a thing where Erdogan is the last one, in the waiting room to be, I guess, killed off. But in addition, even Naftali Bennett going and saying directly to the camera that, Turkey is the next Iran. Turkey is the next Iran. And that's the next.
Really, the former prime minister said that.
The former prime minister of Israel saying that. So that
Yes.
if that is not a clear message, I don't know what else is. Plus, also, as Eldar is saying, the destruction of Iran, the dismantling of Iran for Turkey to have an issue with the Kurds, and especially when they see that Trump has actually been trying to court the Kurds in Iran. He's been trying to kind of maybe do a revival of the Mahabad project in Iran today or something like this. And it seems as if, according to what I've read most recently, the Kurds are not interested in that proposal. They're not interested in that proposition because they've also been screwed over by the U.S. In the past. I mean, in recent memory. So I think at the end of the day, and also the other thing, I think at the end of the day, Turkey is very, very cognizant of what Israel's intentions are, but they're playing their hand very, very well and very, very cleverly. In addition, though, I think also this whole Nakhichevan airport incident in particular, just as Eldar was saying, it made Aliyev understand that he is not invincible, because especially after the conquest of Nagorno-Karabakh, the ethnic cleansing of Nagorno-Karabakh, there was this idea that, I am now a great power, a middle power, even a great power, something like this. But then he understood, no, really, I'm a small state too, and I have the concerns of a small state, and I'm not somebody who can go in and invade northern Iran, because the state in Iran, contrary to what Israel was thinking, contrary to what President Trump was thinking, and even I guess, the CIA was thinking that they were thinking the Iranian government could be so weak that if they take out the supreme leader, the whole edifice would collapse, which makes me really wonder, Pascal, who are the Iran advisors in Washington, D.C.? Because supposedly they've read about Iran, supposedly they're trained in area studies, or they know something about these countries. They should, and they also have intelligence, so they should know how how sophisticated that government is in Iran, and how structured and how strong that government is. That it is not something that you can just take out with by taking out a single leader, because they were able to reproduce and put new leaders in. The fact that they think that, and also the other thing also that really gets me about this war is this kind of religious dimension to it, right? You have Pete Hegseth basically praying for victory and praying for violence over our enemies. It's almost like, if you've ever read, there's a very great classic anti-war work by the famous American writer Mark Twain called The War Prayer. And it reminded me exactly of that when you're watching Hegseth, praying for violence against our enemies and so on and so forth. So I think it really makes me question just how, for I guess what we bill, and even what, directly quoting from Aliyev when he was visiting with J.D. Vance, he said America is the most powerful country in the world. It's this kind of a thing, that it is a military force. It's the most powerful, but now you see how it is. That's supposedly the most powerful country in the world. You see, Iran has it at its mercy with the Strait of Hormuz, with how it's waging this war. It's not the war that Trump and Netanyahu, thought it was going to be.
Yeah, we're seeing the end of power. Like, there's no limit. There's no state with limitless power. Not even the United States. It's very powerful, but even that one has its limits. But Eldar, what you told me about the 40% of Israeli's oil actually coming from Azerbaijan, that's highly interesting, because the Iranians, of course, know that, right? And the Iranians showed, as you said, the willingness to kind of destroy the infrastructure, even if it's on third states. Now, the fact that they didn't do that in Azerbaijan, the fact that they let this oil flow when they could stop it, what does that tell you about the Iranian strategy toward the Southern Caucasus and the entire region? The fact that they did not strike at infrastructure that they could strike at in order to hurt one of the two primary enemies.
Well, I think the Turkish element is clearly important here, because that pipeline, it does go for Turkey, and Turkey benefits in terms of transit. So I think that's one of the strategic elements behind the Iranian restraint. Then, generally speaking, it's not my impression that Iran wants a war on all the fronts at the same time, at least for the time being. So for now, clearly the priority, the focus is on the Persian Gulf. But that does not mean that the South Caucasus, and in particular Azerbaijan and its ties with Israel, are of no concern to Iran. To the contrary, I would say that after the war, Iran possibly will emerge as a weaker state in a conventional sense, but also much more radicalized, much more hardline. And for Aliyev, that means that he will have to deal not with the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, and not with the president, Pezeshkian, but with battle-hardened IRGC people who look at relations with other countries strictly from security lens, and they don't see Azerbaijan primarily as a brotherly Muslim Shiite nation. This kind of rhetoric that the clerical leadership in Iran is particularly fond of. They see Azerbaijan in pure unsentimental power and security lens, and what they see is a close alliance with Israel, and that will determine their strategy, their future strategy towards Azerbaijan. I foresee that it's going to be much more hardline and radical. And even if Iran will itself be weakened by the end of this war, will emerge weaker at the end of this war, it will always be strong enough to inflict an intolerable and unacceptable damage on Azerbaijan. which in turn, I think, will push Aliyev to reconsider or somehow to recalibrate his relations with Israel, which clearly Tehran sees as far too, close to its comfort. Clearly, those ties, they're becoming a strategic liability for Baku. And that's, as we were discussing, that's not just because of Iran, but also because of Turkey. So what I foresee is that there will be some attempts to disentangle from that too close an alliance with Israel, as far as Baku is concerned.
That would make a lot of sense. Pietro, we are already ending the 1 hour mark. So Pietro, maybe your last 2 minutes remarks of what you would like to add to this, and then a very final word to Eldar, and then we wrap it up.
One thing I want to add to this is what the impression is coming here from Armenia, because in Armenia, people are watching this, with great concern, as I was stressing to you last time on the podcast. And actually, that concern turned into alarm once the war actually began. And people are watching this war, or at least they were initially watching this war very closely. Now people are also focused on the election coming up here in June in Armenia. And also, I should say that this situation with the war in Iran has put on hold, uh, indefinitely, this whole idea of the Trump trip corridor. The idea of kind of this, a kind of a corridor going through Armenia's southern Sunni province, right? What they also call the Zangezur corridor idea. That really, at the end of the day, this whole idea of Trump to kind of lease a corridor through southern Armenia for 99 years, something like this. That this whole idea is now completely put on ice. Now, Nikol Pashinyan, the prime minister, continues to act as if like nothing has changed, right? As if because even the media here in Armenia, even Pashinyan's media, that is, not the opposition media in Armenia, but Pashinyan's government, they were believing and they were actually predicting that Iran, would be defeated by the United States in this war. But as a matter of fact, we see the opposite happening. Again, the expectations have been completely upended by how Iran has waged this war. So, and also Iran sees this. Iran sees how, Pashinyan is kind of really, his actions speak louder than words, with regard to relations with Iran. But also, even domestically in Armenia, Pashinyan has major problems. I mean, just yesterday, that was Palm Sunday here in Yerevan, and Pashinyan he pushed his way through a mass. There was this, Badarak, where basically the whole church, St. Anna's Church on Abovian Street, was completely packed with people. And he pushed his way in with his security detail. There was some scuffles going on and all this, but it was a complete embarrassment. And people there were very upset with what he was trying to do. Turn something so sacred as the mass, the mass of the Armenian Church, into a political, statement or a political rally. That's not only counting what he did last weekend, where there was he was trying to kind of solicit support from voters on the streets. He went on the Yerevan metro, and he ended up getting into an argument, a very heated argument, with a woman who was a refugee from Artsakh Nagorno-Karabakh. And he was yelling at her, saying, you people are like, runaways. You people are fugitives. That like, this kind of a thing, that they were not victims of an ethnic cleansing. He like lectured this woman. And you have to think, in a society like Armenia, which is a very traditional, conservative, kind of Caucasian society, how that's received. And she was there with her little son, how something like this is seen in Armenia. So Pashinyan, it's almost like he's making just one mistake after another mistake after another mistake politically in advance of this election in June. So he's not looking so
election in June in Armenia. Sorry, yeah.
Election in June in Armenia. That's what I'm saying. It's not looking so good for him. And the war in Iran also undermines this. Not only because TRIP is put on hold indefinitely, but also because Pashinyan's claim that, Mr. Aliyev and Mr. Trump and me together, we are supporting peace in the region, that I'm the candidate of peace. This is what Pashinyan says. Peace, 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 peace. And then yet, one of the parties of the so-called peace is waging the highest war crime, a war of aggression against Iran in tandem with Netanyahu and Israel. And you see what people see this. I mean, even Armenian villagers in the regions, they see that there's a disconnect between the rhetoric of Pashinyan and the reality that really Trump is not a man of peace. Pashinyan and Aliyev, they were nominating Trump for like the Nobel Peace Prize and all this and that. But now that whole idea of Trump being a man of peace is completely falling apart because he did this war in Iran and you see what's happening. And Iran is also making the point that there's no easy way out of this. You want an off-ramp? Even Pezeshkian was offering him an off-ramp. Pezeshkian was saying, look, he even was apologizing to the neighboring states, saying, oh, maybe we can, kind of cool things down here. And Trump dismissed that peace offering out of hand. That was an off-ramp. That was an off-ramp on March the 7th. He completely destroyed it. And so now when the markets are doing really bad, when they're doing really terrible in the United States, he's looking desperately for an off-ramp, and you can see it's not ending the way he's thinking it's going to end. So that's just my 2 cents on that. And the election in Armenia is going to be very interesting to see how that goes down here.
Yeah, we will also see if it goes down democratically, but we've reached the 1 hour mark. Eldar, your closing kind of words to bring everything together in a beautiful final statement.
Well, first of all, I'd like to follow up on what Pietro just said about trip. And I was always, I'm on the records, by the way, of being very skeptical of this whole scheme. And it's not necessarily, the case of, feeling deeply satisfied of being able to say, I told you so. But nevertheless, that I think is accurate. Trip from the beginning was more like a mirage, more like a PR exercise for Donald Trump as a stepping stone for his Nobel Peace Prize. And I never saw any, substance to that. What I think changed now with the war, or rather maybe not changed, but what was highlighted, is that the United States commitment to the region is erratic and shallow, and especially with the administration that is so diplomatically inept, unprofessional, unwilling, unable to follow through on anything, with a president who is clearly unfit to lead the country, with a hollow-out diplomatic service. It just beggars belief. It's just mind-boggling. How would anyone build their strategy and future on the assumption that this trip project is, a solid foundation for U.S. engagement in the South Caucasus. And frankly, given the way how the Iran war is going, maybe even for the better, because just imagine if indeed the U.S. were to start to build, some sustained presence in Armenia, some real infrastructure with American companies involved, that who knows, in due time, boots on the ground, that would only make Armenia a target for Iran, which it currently isn't.
Yeah.
So, and therefore, I think the lesson that the regional countries will draw from this war is that signing up to these schemes promoted by extra-regional players with very uncertain commitment to the region is simply a road to perdition. And all the regional issues have to be solved among the regional countries based on mutual respect for territorial integrity, for sovereignty, and for their interests. So I'm convinced that only regional approach, regional integration can solve the issues in the South Caucasus, of course, also involving important neighbors like Turkey and Iran.
And also, just to follow up on that, I just wanted to add one more thing, Pascal, that this is my kind of my final piece on this. So this was exactly the idea that was presented by Russia and Iran in the strategic partnership agreement, that they said, you know what, the best way for a regional integration is if the countries of the region come together and work together. It's not about, and that they would exclude, they would work to push out those external forces that seek to kind of create instability and tension in the region. And actually, again, Russia, I should also note this too, has also played a very big role along with China in really kind of supporting Iran in this war.
Yep, we've got the forces of division versus the forces who try to bring things together for some form of mutual prosperity of the future. And well, we will see where it will go, but I'm also quite sure that this will make the case that a sovereign and neutral kind of approach sometimes is the most rational thing to do instead of trying to gang up against one or the other. Ganging up is not usually a good idea, especially in multipolar world. This was highly fascinating. Thank you very much, both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us on. We appreciate it. Thank you so much.
That was my utmost pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
Eldar, Pietro, thank you so much. And
Thank
see you again
Thank
soon.
you. Пока.